Welcome to Cleveland Guardians Press Conference Review, where the answers are made up and the points don't matter.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show today. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today.
We'll play a little Whose Line Is It Anyway today with the Guardians end of season media, because it was just a lot of answers with no real
It felt
no
like
real
a Mad
answers.
Libs.
There were a lot of
like we could have just done Mad Libs and filled it all in with like upside and potential and internal, and
got to weigh these opportunities, and we're really excited about. We'll review some of the stuff, the takeaways from that today. We'll talk about the Guardians do have one loss to start this offseason in terms of personnel. We'll get into that. We're going to look a little bit at the AFL. We haven't really done an Arizona Fall League check-in, so I know people want to hear about Chase DeLauder and some things like that. So we'll squeeze some of that in. We got some other stuff we want to do today or tomorrow. That could be looking at arbitration figures. We got some draft stuff we want to get to. So all that between the next two shows.
yeah, breaking news: Chase DeLauder's foot just completely fell off. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
This is made up, right?
I'm kidding.
I said the whole show was made up today. The answers don't matter.
Which is having some fun. I talked about in yesterday's show how I would love to ask them about some of those risks they've taken. But first, I'm Jeff Ellis, one of your two co-hosts, one of the original co-hosts here on Locked On when it comes to baseball. Before this, I was a lead draft and prospect analyst at Scout in 24/7 nationally. And again, since someone mentioned it the other day, we have to do intros.
Yes, we are that contractually obligated to talk about our credentials and why we are two idiots with a microphone that Locked On thinks is worth talking about the Guardians to you, our fine listeners on the other side of the microphone. I'm Justin Latta, and I've been covering the Guardians minor league system since 2007 for places like Guardians Baseball Insider, the Morning Journal, and the News Herald, where I multiple times have interviewed multiple Cleveland Guardians farm directors, and now I'm going to have to get used to a new one. There's your clue about the person we're going to talk about in the second segment today, and that's I was literally just going to set an opportunity up tomorrow with this person and found out today they are no longer with the Guardians because they were promoted to another organization. So we'll talk about that, but got to get used to new people.
Yeah, but right, I saw all offseason people saying that this front office is terrible and that
they've lost their magic,
and that they can't find talent, and this team doesn't have enough pieces, even though they made the ALCS and had the second best record in the American League. And every year they lose 3 to 4 talented people. And then I had other people be like, well, how important can they be? They keep refilling the spots. It's like, I talked about last year. There's always a worry about brain drain. I guess you just, you trust the people at the top, but he's not going to be the only one. This is just the beginning.
It is. And they've gone through this every year. So we'll talk about that in the second segment. Let's start with some of the things that Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff and Stephen Vogt talked about at the end of season media availability. The first one, this wasn't the first question, but this was the most predictable one by far in terms of what do you think you can do in the off season, and wasn't payroll related, but it was about what we thought it was going to be, providing opportunities to young players. So as far as off season goals, Chris Antonetti said we'll have to go into the off season and weigh this because we're excited about the group of players we have, not only that have already contributed to the major league level, but a really healthy player development system. And minor league players are on the cusp, if not ready to fill some of those opportunities. So you have to weigh what's the benefit of providing some of those young players opportunities and contribute versus what other opportunities there might be externally to bolster the team. And there's not one magic answer to that. So they have to weigh external additions versus opportunities for young players. And what that means is, do we want to sign a right fielder?
No.
And not play Noel or Brennan, the Will Brennan thing we'll get to in a future episode, or do we want to let somebody else like Noel or Jonathan Rodriguez keep the seat warm until Chase DeLauder proves that his foot won't fall off at the first sprint he does in spring training? And the same thing on the infield. If the infield is going to be a lot more complicated to figure out. So I think this is essentially, to me, chase the water, right? This is the answer here. Is
Yeah, I think there's also some Juan Brito. I know people aren't going to want to, he's kind of a forgotten man, but like, especially if they do make some trades and open up more time at DH, I think there's, they went out and got the guy for a reason.
He did, but he could also be a trade chip too, because you've got Rocchio and Jimenez. You want to bring up the Rocchio thing so badly. Like, there was a question about what Rocchio did this season in the postseason, in the postseason press conference here, and the entire answer was just about the work he put in this year, and there were no negatives. There was no definitive like he's our shortstop next year. There was no.
Well, they'll never do that, but
yeah, and there was no question about Jimenez's defensive position. It was just about how can he get better with the bat. But there was no question of, is this guy your shortstop? Is this guy your second baseman? And
they are, though.
It was Rocchio's hard work this year, and how impressed they were with his work.
Yeah, if they're not hedging it, like they more or less are. I mean, for me, like just to kind of sum these up, it's like very quickly, it's like Rocchio is going to be the starting shortstop next year. Jimenez is your starting second baseman. As for Brito, I think he's a DH, so that's why I'm like, I don't know about trade bait. I think there's some limited there, but that's a story for another day. I think, it keeps coming.
Might be your DH because he can't play a position to start next year.
I know, but eventually that might be his overhanging role. But yeah, they need to. I think the infield set for most positions. First base, we'll see. But I feel like shortstop, second base, third base, we know where this team is going to be.
Yeah, we'll get to the Josh Naylor comments.
Yeah, and David Fry still might be better in a platoon role, so we'll have to kind of wait and see on that. And Brito would be actually a decent partner from what I recall.
Yeah, it's kind of too soon to tell on that. I have to go back and look at that, but I think it's a little too soon to tell. I think he had a fluky year, but we'll do that when we do our second base position review. The other question that was asked before we get into some more high level, low level stuff, or high level stuff, however you want to put it, about there was a question about young pitching versus veteran pitching, and talking about, do they want to add veteran starting pitchers to this group, or how do you balance that as well as versus the group on the younger side, and said, reasons we were attracted to both Matt and Alex. And Alex was they had established themselves as effective and starting pitchers. Those are things they're looking for, but equally important to us to know that we have a successful team moving forward. We have to help the guys that are here continue to get better and improve. And we believe, can be a big part of our rotation. That's a lot of work to do. So the guys that are here have to improve. And that to me says, and I specifically asked, this wasn't the question I asked, but I specifically followed that up with, what was the message to Logan Allen and Tristan McKenzie this offseason? And essentially it was, do what you got to do to get better in this winter and come to spring training ready to compete. There was not a very definitive answer, and I didn't expect one. This was vote, by the way. I didn't expect a definitive answer to this too. It's just, what are you telling McKenzie and Allen this offseason to prepare for? Because those two guys have a lot to prove. Like they shouldn't be handed starting pitching roles next year. You can't do that. But the problem is, they almost have to be penciled in, because if you don't make any external additions, it's Bybee, Lively, Williams, Cantillo, Allen, and McKenzie. That's 6 right there. So they almost have to be penciled in for rotation roles next year.
And McKenzie is out of options too.
McKenzie is out of options, so that puts him in a certain corner. But basically, the message to them was just, work on, do what you need to do to get to where you want to be. Come into spring training ready to compete. They talked about Tristan staying healthy this year, and those guys both showed
something else people need to know. Like, I saw a few people in our comments be like, well, he wasn't healthy. And then, no, he was healthy. He just wasn't good.
Yeah, he was healthy all year. Towards the end of the year, he actually got better a little bit. His last start of the year was pretty bad. They tried him in the bullpen in the minors, didn't work out. There was a whole bunch of stuff there. So there's a lot to work on there.
When you measure their statements there versus their statements for Rocchio, it kind of speaks volumes with both, I think. Like when you look at just looking at the different way
they got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, there's no guarantee for those guys.
No, I mean, there's more guarantee for McKenzie because, like you said, he's out of options. So there is that.
Yeah.
Here's a couple of other rundown things. So I know Zach tweeted this from one of the media sessions too, and he said all coaches will be back next year. That's the plan, unless somebody gets promoted to another organization in terms of being hired. So that would essentially mean Carl Willis is coming back. Although I know Zach noted that Carl Willis could potentially contemplate retirement. We don't know that for sure yet. The only guy I would think of, like we'll talk about one of the coaches in the second segment. There's two coaches specifically. There's Craig Almanaz, who we'll talk about later in today's show, and Brad Goldberg are the two guys I would think of the most in terms of being lured away on the coaching side of things. But everybody else, I think, will be back. Valleca is going to be back. I think Joe Torres is the assistant to Willis. Is that who it is still?
I honestly can't remember.
Valleca's got an assistant.
Yeah, I think it's those are the only two that I really see any pathway to.
Yeah, it's Valleca, or not Valleca, it's Albanez and Brad Goldberg. So we'll get into more of that. David Fry is going to meet with Dr. Keith Meister in the coming weeks to talk about his elbow injury. They didn't say he's getting Tommy John, but Keith Meister does Tommy John surgery, so you can kind of draw the line there, which we kind of thought.
Yeah.
The Guardians are interested in all of their free agents coming back. They didn't mention Carlos Carrasco.
Except for one.
Yeah, they talked about mutual interest between Bieber and Boyd and Cobb and Hedges, and all four of them expressed interest in coming back next year as well. Things are a little more complicated with some of those guys, and they didn't mention Carrasco, and I don't know if anybody even mentioned Carrasco because I didn't hear the question up front. But I will say this for the question of, are you interested in bringing Hedges and Cobb and Boyd and Bieber back? I would be more surprised if they said, no, we want to cut bait with them. So like when you ask them a question about that, if they're not saying, the exclusion of Carrasco, I don't really know the context to, so I'm not going to say things I don't know. But I would have been more surprised if they were like, yeah, we're interested in bringing Bieber back. We're interested in bringing Hedges back. And then and Boyd, if they just mysteriously left out Cobb, I'd have been like, oh, well, that's so I'd have been more surprised they left any of those guys out. So we'll get into that. There's a couple more. They were asked about Hedges and Stefan and Karinchak, and all of them. I'm sorry, not all of them. So they did say that Hedges will miss all of next season. They expected that. They didn't go any more detail about his contract situation. He's already eligible. Obviously, they didn't. We'll talk about that in the coming days as well. But they expect Stefan to be ready to compete in spring training, and they did say that Karinchak will be ready to pitch at the outset of 2025. They didn't say for who. They just said he'll be ready to pitch.
Well, he's supposed to be ready to pitch at some point last year, and it really never developed.
Yeah, it was a weird one. Yeah, I still think there's very little chance of that happening, but he is still part of the team as of right now, so they couldn't say.
Yeah, when they sent out their roster, we got a roster sent out being part of the media today. It's like, well, thanks, guys, but like literally nothing has changed.
No, nothing has changed. No. All right, we got Josh Naylor to talk about from this meeting as well, and we got some prospect news from this meeting as well. We have to talk about the Guardians losing a member of the front office, others being interviewed, and we'll check in on the AFL, all coming up on the rest of this episode. NFL fans, get the season started, keep the season going with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you are just sitting there in the middle of the game, whether it's the Browns game and you want to bet on how many points they're not going to score, because they're one of the few teams, I think they're the only team in the NFL, correct me if I'm wrong, that hasn't scored 20 points this year. It's pretty bad. So if you get a hunch in the middle of the game, the Browns are not going to make it to that magical point of 20 in a game. Check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So if you haven't gotten in yet on the action in FanDuel, great time to do it. Put $5 down on anything. The NBA season just started. The NHL is in full gear. Lots of stuff going on across the sports world. And if you want to bet on the World Series, going to be an interesting one, even if it's still a little bit painful for you. But if you haven't bet on FanDuel yet, put $5 down, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com. All right, Jeff, let's start with Josh Naylor. So came up in one of the sessions, and the question about what Josh Naylor was what to expect from him next year. And the quote was, our expectation is Josh will be an anchor on our team in 2025. And who knows, hopefully beyond that. At the same time, he's a really good player. And like any good player on our roster, I imagine there'll be other teams that will call and ask us about a variety of guys. That's what happens over the course of the winter. Cleveland has, to my knowledge, I'm trying to think.
I was like, did they even address Lindor in his year? That's what I was trying to think. Like, did they make a similar statement?
Yeah, it was pretty much the same. It was pretty much the same. But I was thinking about past contracts because I looked this up. The last time, here's the last deals Cleveland's done that were non-pre-arb deals. So we have the Jose Ramirez contract for 2021. That's obviously a non-pre-arb deal. Carlos Carrasco renegotiated his pre-arb deal to extend that past his first deal. That was a special circumstance because he took way below market because he was older and he wanted to stay.
And he had the heart issue.
Yeah, he had the health scares at that point. Him and had gone through leukemia at that point, which is still crazy to think back on for him. You had the Edwin Encarnacion free agent signing, which obviously was not an ARB deal. And then before that, you have to go all the way back to Travis Hafner
it's
for a hitter. Yeah, 4 years, $57 million in 2012, and he really didn't make any good on that contract because his shoulder fell apart. And then Jake Westbrook that same year. I remember that year. It was Hafner, Westbrook, and Cliff Lee. Those are the big three free agents going into 2012, and it was like, well, you're going to maybe sign two of the three, and back then that was crazy to think about because even now you wouldn't think that.
Yeah, even leading
never
up
even
to
tried with Cliff Lee.
Yeah,
Cliff Lee was gone by then, wasn't he?
No, because Lee was.
That couldn't have been 2012 because Travis Hafner was with the Yankees in 2013. So this must have been 2009.
Yeah, because this was.
I had the years wrong on.
Yeah, the whole thing with that too was being really. I feel like it was 07, really, where we started to have these discussions because it was also like
when
Sabathia.
Did Jake Westbrook have his Tommy John? Because Jake Westbrook got hurt like almost immediately after.
Yeah, I'll pull it up real
Travis
quick.
Hafner.
Yeah, but and I will say like Hafner is one of those 2008s when he got hurt. So yeah, it was like 2007 we started discussing a lot of this. Hafner's numbers are actually better than I expected. I know recently when I went and looked at him in those years, the power was not there. But what I remember is like it was in 07 because it was 07 and it wasn't as much Lee because he hadn't broken out yet. Like in 07, Lee was worthless, but it was Sabathia, Westbrook, and Hafner. And the thought process, I remember,
Sabathia wasn't happening.
Yeah, and you knew but you also had Adam Miller, who you thought could maybe replace him, and you had Fausto Carmona, who looked like the next big ace for them. So like you had all these situations that were occurring, and then unfortunately, health became as well as other things. But that's what I remember. But yeah, Westbrook technically signed that extension. Let's see. Does it give the exact day? Sometimes on Baseball Reference it does, but it doesn't say here. But either way, he signed it. 2009, he doesn't pitch at all. 2008, he pitched all of 34 innings. And then 2010, dude came back with 202 innings. So
and they traded him to St. Louis.
Yeah.
So those are the last time Cleveland has done non-pre-arb deals. And they were all pretty much.
I mean, the Jose extension.
You can't really even factor that in here. Like, I know some people are saying convince Josh to stay to play with his brother. Josh is going to go get his money.
He hasn't got the bag.
He hasn't got the bag. He's due, what do we say, 14 million this year?
12 million.
12. We'll get to that tomorrow a little bit more in detail.
Like he's had health issues. He's also a bigger dude. Like he's approaching 30. Like this is his window. And like, I also think like, yeah, it's fun to play with your brother, but I think there's also a degree of like, I don't know how much that really matters. Like, he got to do it. He got to experience it. I don't know if that's going to cut millions of dollars off of what he can earn. Like,
yeah, Jose did take a hometown discount because he likes Cleveland and for whatever reason, and that's great.
Because he doesn't want to go to a big market. Josh. We just saw the postseason. He's not a guy who wants that light. Couldn't help with a minor slam with my postseason annoyance.
Even with Josh, let's say he even wants to stay to play with his brother. Let's just say that's even a pull for him. There is still a threat. It was the same for Jose Ramirez. There is still a threshold of money. There's still a number that Cleveland's going to have to get to. Like,
they're not paying a first baseman with health issues and conditioning issues. I don't even think it matters. I don't think Cleveland has a real interest in keeping Naylor. If you had like the lasso of truth from Wonder Woman and you wrapped around Chris Antonetti, it's like, would you feel comfortable paying Josh Naylor for more than 3 years? I think you'd say no.
Yeah, there is a certain contract that Josh is going to want to stay. And that certain contract, whether it's years and dollars, it might be less than what he would get on the open market from the Mariners. I'm just throwing whoever out there needs a first baseman next year, whatever. Doesn't have to be anybody specific, but there might be a certain market value he knows he can get on the open market next year. And he might be willing to stay for less for the poll playing with his brother. But there's still a certain number of years and dollar amount he's going to want to stay that might be less than open market value, but you still have to hit his number that he's comfortable with taking to stay. And I think there is a number that exists for that. I do think that. But you're right. I don't think Cleveland's going to be interested in that because he doesn't have the longevity, the body type, the hit, and that profile just ages poorly, right? Like he doesn't really walk a lot. When you're a chaser, like look at Javi Baez. I'm not saying he's Javi Baez, but like, look how poor that has aged because he's a hacker. He doesn't have a good. Javi Baez never had a good approach to the plate. I'll say Naylor's a little better than that, but that's just how that skill set ages, right? Like that's not good. So Cleveland, I think, is going to be very cautious. And they have Kyle Manzardo. You've got hopefully Ralphie Velasquez somewhere down the line. You know, you want to keep DH a little bit open if you can. So bogging first base DH down long term between David Fry and Manzardo and Josh Naylor.
And a chance that Jose is going to have to play there eventually towards the end.
Right. You want to be able to rotate. You want to be able to rotate DH days for Jose. You want to be able to keep your roster flexible. That's all going to matter. So I don't think an extension for Josh is coming. A trade, I don't know. Jeff said Jeff has some trade ideas. We're not going to get into those today. My only question with that is like replacing him in the lineup is going to be a lot harder. But there's going to be conversations all offseason. There were conversations last offseason. What the Cubs were in on him. The Mariners were talking about it.
I mean, we don't know how much any of that is legit. Like, you know, like so much of that was like, that's the one thing I'll say. It's like the Cubs stuff especially seemed to be a lot of smoke and mirrors and not a whole lot of basis to it.
See, I thought the Mariners one was a little more.
I do until they went and did their small deal and got Luke Raley, who actually had a better year than Josh Naylor. So,
ironically, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we got one free
plus before I get myself in trouble.
Yeah, not home runs and RBIs. Yeah. Well, we're going to do position review and we'll get into all this stuff eventually. Yeah. There's a lot to talk about over the offseason. I'm fine. I think I flipped. I needed a day to reflect and needed a day to get my emotions out about the season being over. I am now fully ready to dive into the offseason. We were talking draft before we started recording. We're talking about arbitration. We're talking about position reviews. I'm ready to fully dive into the offseason. So we do have our first major domino to fall for the Guardians in the offseason. We'll talk about that. Some other interviews going on. We'll jump into the Arizona Fall League a little bit too before we end today's show. And then we're going to have to push, as always, we're going to have to push some of our draft stuff and arbitration stuff to tomorrow. So lots to enjoy ahead here.
But first, our good friends over at Prize Picks. And you've heard me talk about Prize Picks many times on the show. Today, well, not when you're listening, but today as I'm recording, they were still giving away Anthony Edwards at pick more or less, and it was just half a point. He had to score a point. And you just got to go to Prize Picks and check it out to look for when they're going to have those deals, those specials, those moments where they're giving you a free category. Because Prize Picks works by you pick 2 to 6 categories. When they give you one like that, that means you just got to pick one more to your payout. And if let's say you're going to go for all 6, they also have Flex Pay now to allow you, even if you don't hit all of them, to still have to collect. But most importantly, right now, Prize Picks is giving you a special deal. So download the app, go to the website, use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB, and you get $50 instantly when you play your first 5. Again, that's $50. So go to the website, use the app. Code is LOCKEDONMLB to get a $50 bonus when you play your first 5 instantly. Prize Picks, run your game.
Still a lot of time before the World Series, oddly enough. And if you're one of the people who wants to listen to the World Series, you can search for that. Yankees or Dodgers on your Sirius XM app for all that good stuff. All right, let's get into the first offseason hire away from the Guardians. Director of Player Development Rob Cerfolio is now a assistant GM with the St. Louis Cardinals. They announced that on Tuesday morning. I asked Chris Antonetti in the postseason media session if he could comment on any hirings that may have happened from the player development group, and he said they're not in a position to do that, but they'll comment soon. So they haven't. I don't know if he knew the Cardinals had made the announcement official at that point. So, but they did make it official. Come to find out, Rob Cerfolio was only 32, by the way.
Yeah, that was one of those moments. I was like, oh,
he's younger than most of the Cardinals pitchers. That's awesome. Yeah. I've talked to Rob a number of times over the last couple of years. I always found him to be very engaging, very bright. I always liked his player-centric approach to development. What I mean by that is they always use the term partner, right? And Chris Anthony mentioned it, Vogt mentioned it. The term partner with players. It's not telling them what to do. It's not telling them do this, do that. We believe this, you do that. It's partnering with players on how they want to go about improving and their growth and what they want to work on. And a lot of times that's players coming to them. Sometimes that's them coming to the players and coming up with a plan that makes sense for those players. I was talking to our buddy Matt, from who's a Cardinals fan and a writer of Prospects Live, and he said that the Cardinals have been very focused over the last decade of doing things the Cardinals way, that it's our way and no other way. And Rob Cerfolio, I think, is the antithesis. How do I say that word? Good Lord. Antithesis.
Antithesis. Yes.
To that, he is. I'm a podcaster. I don't know how to say words. Cool. He's the antithesis to that because he is very player focused about what does a player feel comfortable doing. They're very, they're all about player comfort and what's going to bring the best out in them. So that's a great quality in a director of player development, and he's kind of do a lot of the same things for the Cardinals. But you get that title of assistant GM, which he wasn't getting here, is the lure to St. Louis, and that's why he was able to be hired away, because you've got other AGMs here that they just couldn't promote him to at this point. So he does that. He's going to take on a lot of similar responsibilities, it sounds like, but he's going to be more in charge of people running the day-to-day things there. But I think it's a good hire for St. Louis. It's a big loss for Cleveland, but it's not new for Cleveland, right? They've lost a lot of these guys. They've lost Eric Falvey. Ross Atkins was a long time ago. Carter Hawkins. James Harris was in this role. He's now an AGM, which again is why, Rob might have been blocked here. And that's why he was able to get the AGM role somewhere else. But it's a big loss. And you do worry, Jeff, about brain drain. Like you said, like they consistently year for year lose guys in the offseason, and that's not new. And it's also the product of deep playoff runs. When you make deep playoff runs, teams want to hire your best.
Yeah. And, there's a few points just to kind of pile onto this. One, he has been in the system for basically, I think, 9 years, and that's quite a quick rise for a guy in 9 years. So that also speaks to him. I'm very curious to see how this goes in St. Louis, because Bloom was a disaster show in Boston. So it's kind of weird that he's getting this opportunity, that's who hired him. So I think he's maybe trying to change some approaches and do some things differently, as that was, it didn't go well last time he had a job. I mean, it went about as badly as it could go. So it's interesting that St. Louis really wants to try to do a completely new approach. They brought him in. They're giving him the opportunity. It's funny how these Boston guys keep getting second chances, like Cherington and Pittsburgh, and especially in the Central. The NL Central has 2 retread fired GMs taking over their teams. Hopefully it works better for St. Louis than it so far has worked for Pittsburgh, who was finished last in the division again last year. But yeah, I think he is a rising name. I think it's a good hire for them. I think it stinks for Cleveland. But yeah, I think when you're looking at this, they'll find the next guy. I mean, we just faced the Yankees with Matt Blake helping turn around all those pitchers like Luke Weaver and everyone else who was, again, he was a Cleveland guy.
Ruben Niebla in San Diego. Yeah, they've lost a lot. I forgot that we didn't get to this. This is the bigger part of player development we didn't get to. This was the last leftover from the media session with Chris Antonetti. George Valera. We talked a lot about George Valera on the show. I asked Chris Antonetti, and clearly I didn't know how this process worked, which it's a very vague process anyway. There's not a whole lot out there on it. So we've been wondering for a while now, George Valera, with all of his injuries, could he get a 4th option year? And I thought it was one of those things you got to apply for it or whatever. Chris quickly corrected me. You don't need to apply for this, but George Valera will get a 4th option year. So he will have an option next year. So he will not need to make this team out of spring training. He wouldn't admit it anyway, but he would not need to rehab and be put on the roster right away. So for all of 2025, George Valera will have an option. So they don't need to worry about losing him next year. So he will be here. He has no trade value right now. He's hurt. So,
which he's always hurt. Like that's part of his problem.
So it gives them a little more time. So we'll see what happens there. That was the big news out of that too, is he does get a 4th option year. So that's good for him. Honestly, maybe it's not. I guess it's good for him. It allows his rehab to be a little more calm and steady and not have to worry about going up against a roster spot. And for Cleveland, it gives him more time too. So good thing there. The other bit of news, we didn't get this from the media. We got this from a friend of you and me, Guardians assistant general manager Matt Foreman, in one of those roles, the assistant GM roles that, Rob, I guess,
Couldn't have.
Couldn't have. Yeah, I guess because you had James Harris and Matt
But
Foreman.
maybe he could have if he had waited a few weeks.
Yeah, so we know he's interviewing elsewhere. I don't know any details on that, but I know there's other opportunities out there that he apparently is being considered for. I don't even know. Maybe the Giants are looking for a GM under Buster Posey. So maybe Matt Foreman is up for that role. I don't know. I just know that he's interviewing for other positions. I don't know what they are. I don't know who they're with, but I do know that apparently there is interest in Matt Foreman for roles, presumably that would be a step up to GM. So yeah, there's that. And then we know Craig Albanese, who is, Stephen Vogt's right-hand man, his chief of staff, is been rumored, and this has been very public for a while now, that he's been mentioned in connection with the Marlins managerial opening. There's only 30 of these things. I guess the Marlins are going in a better direction than the White Sox because the Marlins have some pieces.
You're guaranteed
some of them
to get a good amount of run if you get that job. Like, you're not worried about getting fired in the first 3 years is the upside of that job.
Yeah, it's a tough one. But yeah, you're right. You're definitely not worried about getting in there and sucking the first 2 years and then worried about your job security. Whereas at the White Sox, who knows? Because Jerry Reinsdorf is a nightmare. So I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I mean, maybe I would wait if I was Albanese. I don't know any insight into these things, and maybe I'd want to wait for a better opportunity and see where this thing goes with Cleveland. But if you're ready, you're ready. And couldn't fault him if he takes it, if they interview him for it. He interviewed for Cleveland's job here last year before it went to Stephen Vogt. So that'd be another big loss, though, because Stephen Vogt having that lieutenant and Albanese, I think, was a nice security blanket for him in his first year. Maybe a second year he won't need it as much. But
and you do have Kai Correa, who has done that role before.
Yeah, you do have other guys, but I think that bench coach role, it's always good to have somebody in your corner who's, Vogt talks about. He'll check him, a reality check when he needs it. He'll back up his decisions, or he'll tell him when he thinks he's wrong. He's not afraid to challenge him. Losing that, I think hurts, especially since those two are close, right? Like those two have been buddies since their minor league days. So I think it would be a significant loss. So we'll see if he's in serious contention down in Miami and how big of a loss that would be for Vogt in terms of having his right-hand man. So we did not have time today, Jeff, for the Arizona Fall League like I wanted. I'm not shocked by that.
Nor am I.
Yeah. So tomorrow on the show, you can expect us to talk about the Arizona Fall League. We'll check in on Chase DeLauder and other guys down there. We're going to get into some arbitration figures. We know those. Jeff had some trades about Josh Naylor he wanted to explore, so we'll talk about those.
I don't know if we'll get to those because we also got to do some talk about draft standing. So I think we'll probably save the Naylor stuff for a little bit down the line.
Okay. You can expect some draft talk tomorrow for sure. Yeah. We're looking forward to that. So still a lot to go. We are not slowing down with content. There's a lot to talk about. Honestly, we've got shows packed for the next, 6 weeks, 8 weeks until we are on a 3-day rotation. So we've got a lot. If you're looking for your off-season fix of Guardians baseball news, content, whatever it is, we're going to be here every day, and we've got stuff planned every day. So don't miss a show.
I've even got, maybe I'll do it in here as a bonus podcast. I did my way too early mock draft when the season ended. I've got it sitting in front of me. The order is probably all messed up, honestly, but I've got that. So maybe I'll throw that out at some point. Let me know if
you're not drafting Nick Kurtz. I don't want it.
Well, you can't anymore. But maybe I can interest you in another first baseman. But thank you all for joining us. Rate and review. Smash that thumbs up. Whatever, you know what to do. Thank you all.
Merry Christmas.
No, he's in Oakland now. We don't want Oakland's not allowed to have nice things.
He's in Sacramento.
No, they're not allowed to have nice things. They have a terrible owner. No nice things for them ever. Thank you all for joining us. And go. He can still go visit hurricanes. I'm sure they're happening somewhere. Go Guardians, go.